Okay, so today we're diving into a story that feels like it's straight out of a spy thriller. We're talking about undersea cables, mysterious damage in the Baltic Sea, and a whole lot of international intrigue. Our sources for this deep dive are a mix of news articles and reports, and they all point to one thing. NATO's got a brand new mission on its hands, protecting these vital undersea cables.
And you know what makes this so fascinating? We're not just talking about some random technical glitches here. These cables are the backbone of our entire interconnected world. They carry internet traffic communication data, even electricity. It's like they're the veins and arteries of the digital age. So any damage to them can have these huge ripple effects, like across the entire globe.
It's crazy, right? And this whole thing kicked off on Christmas Day of last year, 2024. Picture this, everyone's enjoying the holidays, and suddenly, the Estlink 2 power cable, which connects Estonia and Finland, just dies. It goes kaput. And of course, Estonia's power grid takes a major hit. And people are freaking out, wondering if this has anything to do with those already sky-high energy prices.
Yeah, and then just a month later, bam, another cable bites the dust. This time, it's a communications cable between Sweden and Latvia, causing all sorts of disruptions to data transmissions. 2 incidents, both involving these super important undersea cables, same region within weeks of each other. Definitely raises some eyebrows, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It makes you wonder what's really going on beneath the surface. So get this, the main suspect. Ships dragging their anchors along the seabed and either accidentally or intentionally snagging and damaging these cables. It sounds almost too simple, right? Like something out of a pirate movie, but the implications are huge.
I know it's like this low-tech tactic, but with the potential for massive disruption. The question is, are these just some unfortunate accidents, or is there something more intentional going on here?
Right, because in the Estlink 2 case, Finnish authorities, they detained a tanker called the Eagle S. They suspected it was dragging its anchor right over the cable when it failed. And then with the Swedish-Latvian cable incident, there's this Bulgarian cargo ship, the Vejen, that's under investigation for possibly doing the same thing.
Sounds a little fishy to me. But before we jump to any conclusions, let's hear from the ship owners. Maybe they were just sailing along totally clueless about the potential damage they were causing.
Well, of course, both of them claim they were victims of bad weather, rough seas, their anchors dragging unintentionally. But hold on a second. NATO officials who were monitoring ship activity in the Baltic Sea, they reported some ships with anchors dragged for a couple of 100 miles. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like a pretty long accidental drag to me.
Yeah, that's a bit hard to believe. That detail definitely raises some serious red flags, and this is where those suspicions about Russia's involvement start to creep in.
Exactly. Because suddenly everyone's talking about Russia's shadow fleet, these older tankers that are suspected of trying to dodge those Western sanctions on Russian oil. The question is, could they be using these ships for something more than just sneaking around those sanctions? Some experts seem to think so.
Right. It's this idea of hybrid warfare, these actions that are designed to disrupt and destabilize. But without resorting to a full-blown military conflict, it's like this shadowy game of chess where each move is calculated to sow chaos and test the resolve of their opponents.
And the timing of these incidents just adds fuel to that fire, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It all coincides with those heightened tensions between Russia and the West, following the invasion of Ukraine. And then you've got this whole pattern of suspected attacks on critical infrastructure in the region, like GPS jamming that's been messing with civilian aircraft landings for months.
Yeah, it's all a bit too coincidental. Now, Russia, they deny any involvement in these incidents, but some of those Baltic nations and NATO officials, they're not buying it. And let's be real, even if these were accidents, they expose a major vulnerability in our global infrastructure.
Absolutely. Which brings us to NATO's response, Operation Baltic Sentry. Their brand new mission to protect that undersea infrastructure in the region. They're pulling out all the stops. Increased naval patrols, maritime patrol aircraft, even AI-powered systems to analyze ship movements and identify anything suspicious.
It's fascinating how NATO is adapting to these new potential threats. They're combining traditional naval tactics with cutting-edge technology, all to safeguard those essential undersea cables. And, it's not just about catching the bad guys red-handed. It's about gathering evidence, building a case, and hopefully deterring any future attacks.
Right, but here's the thing. Proving sabotage and actually pinning the blame on anyone, it's incredibly difficult. Even with all the fancy tech and increased surveillance, getting that undeniable smoking gun evidence, it's a real challenge. And if you make false accusations, you could easily escalate tensions even further.
Exactly. It's a delicate situation. Captain Niels Markussen, who heads up NATO's maritime operations, put it perfectly. He said, and I quote, "Attribution is difficult. The proof, the smoking gun, it's very, very difficult."
It's a tricky situation. And you know what these incidents really highlight? It's a much bigger and more unsettling truth. Our entire interconnected world is incredibly vulnerable. Think about it, over 95% of global internet traffic. And trillions of dollars in daily international trade. It all relies on these cables.
And imagine the consequences if a coordinated attack managed to sever multiple cables at once. Communication networks could be paralyzed, financial markets could plunge, essential services could be crippled. It would be chaos.
It really makes you realize just how much we take for granted, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We flip a switch, the lights come on, we send an email, it arrives instantly on the other side of the world. But behind all those everyday actions lies this incredibly complex and vulnerable network of undersea cables.
Right. It's like we're living on top of this hidden world, this digital nervous system that we never really think about until something goes wrong, and then suddenly we're confronted with just how fragile it all is.
It's a wake-up call for sure. And as we delve deeper into this story, we're going to uncover just how far-reaching those impacts can be. So buckle up, because things are about to get really interesting.
Yeah, it really does make you think, about all the things we just take for granted in our digital lives. Like, we flip a switch, the lights go on, we send an email, and boom, it's there on the other side of the world instantly. But behind all of that, there's this whole incredibly complex and vulnerable network of undersea cables.
It's true. It's like this hidden world, right? This digital nervous system running beneath the ocean. We don't even think about it until something goes wrong, and then bam, we're suddenly face to face with just how fragile it all is.
Exactly. And it's not even just about the physical cables themselves. It's the data they carry, the connections they make possible, this whole system that we rely on. If one part of that network gets disrupted, it can have these cascading effects, like across the entire globe.
So let's talk about those impacts. Beyond the obvious stuff like power outages and internet disruptions, what are the longer-term consequences of something like this? Like if there was a major incident, how would that actually affect our everyday lives?
Well, first of all, think about the economic impact. We're talking about trillions of dollars in daily financial transactions, global supply chains, international trade. It all flows through these cables. If there was a big enough disruption, it could trigger a global financial crisis. You could see job losses, shortages of essential goods, widespread economic instability. It would be bad.
And it's not just about the money either, right?
Of course not. Think about our social lives, how we communicate, how we access information. It all depends on these cables.
It does.
Imagine a world where you couldn't connect with your loved ones overseas or access online banking. You couldn't even stream your favorite shows. It would be like taking a giant step backwards, impacting everything from education and healthcare to entertainment and just basic social interaction.
It's a pretty scary thought. It makes you realize just how interconnected we really are, and how much we depend on this infrastructure that most of us never even think about. But it's not all doom and gloom, is it? I mean, surely there are ways to protect these cables, to make the system more resilient.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where things get really interesting. From both a technological and strategic perspective, protecting undersea cables, it requires a multi-layered approach. You need a combination of surveillance, deterrence, and resilience.
Okay, let's break that down a little bit. When you say surveillance, what does that actually look like in this context?
Well, it involves a mix of traditional methods, like you've got your naval patrols, your maritime surveillance aircraft. But then you've also got these really cutting-edge technologies, things like underwater drones, sonar systems, even satellites with sensors that can detect tiny changes on the ocean floor.
So basically, they're keeping a close eye on these massive stretches of ocean, looking for anything suspicious, any sign that someone might be messing with the cables.
Exactly. And it's not just about looking for physical intrusions. They're also monitoring data traffic, looking for anomalies, anything that might point to a cyber attack or an attempt to disrupt communications.
Right, because it's not just about physical sabotage anymore. There's the whole digital threat as well. It's like a whole new battleground, this cyber underwater realm where the stakes are unbelievably high.
That's a great way to put it. And then you've got deterrence, which is all about making it crystal clear to anyone thinking about attacking these cables that there will be serious consequences.
So basically flexing their muscles a little bit, showing that they're not going to tolerate any funny business.
You got it. It could involve economic sanctions, diplomatic pressure, in extreme cases, maybe even military action. The key is to make sure that the cost of an attack far outweighs any potential benefits.
I see. And then finally, you mentioned resilience. I'm guessing that's about making the system itself tougher, less vulnerable to disruption.
Right. It's about building redundancy into the network so that if one cable is damaged, there are other ways for the data to flow. It also means having backup power supplies, robust cybersecurity measures, and the ability to repair any damage quickly.
So like a plan B.
Yeah.
And maybe even a plan C, so the whole system doesn't just collapse if one part of it fails.
Exactly. And this is where collaboration becomes super important. We need governments working with private companies because a lot of these cables are owned and operated by telecom companies. So ensuring their security requires a joint effort.
It sounds like a huge undertaking, a global challenge that needs international cooperation and a ton of technological innovation.
It definitely is. But it's a challenge we absolutely have to face head on because the stakes are just too high to ignore. Our interconnected world has given us so many benefits, but it's also created new vulnerabilities, these points of failure that could be exploited by those who want to cause disruption or even destruction.
And it's not just nation states that we have to worry about, right?
Not at all. You've got non-state actors, terrorist groups, even criminal organizations. They could all potentially target these cables for their own purposes.
It's kind of overwhelming when you think about all the potential risks out there.
I know it can be, but remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about these threats, the better equipped we'll be to address them.
That's a good point.
And it's also important to remember that while there are definitely risks, there are also some incredible opportunities. These undersea cables, beyond their role in communication, they can also be used for scientific research, environmental monitoring, even renewable energy generation.
Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. How can we turn these potential vulnerabilities into something positive?
Well, for example, scientists are starting to use the fiber optic cables themselves as sensors to detect earthquakes, tsunamis, even changes in ocean temperature. It's like turning the entire cable network into a giant underwater observatory.
Wow, that's amazing. It's like taking a potential weakness and turning it into a strength.
Right.
What about the renewable energy aspect? How do cables play into that?
There are companies developing underwater data centers powered by renewable energy sources, like offshore wind farms. And these data centers would be connected to the mainland via undersea cables. It creates a sustainable and resilient alternative to those traditional land-based data centers.
So instead of being just a target, these cables could actually become part of the solution to some of the world's biggest challenges, like climate change and the ever-growing demand for data storage.
Exactly. It's all about innovation, finding creative ways to utilize this existing infrastructure for the greater good. It reminds us that technology itself is neutral. It's how we choose to use it. That determines whether it becomes a force for progress or destruction.
It's about finding that balance, isn't it? Recognizing the risks, but also embracing the potential. And it sounds like there's a lot of potential when it comes to undersea cables.
There is. And as we continue to explore this topic, we'll uncover even more fascinating aspects of this hidden world beneath the waves.
You know, it's amazing when you think about it, all the possibilities wrapped up in these undersea cables. We've talked about the physical threats, the digital threats, the potential for things to be disrupted or even destroyed. But it feels like there's this whole other layer to this, almost like a psychological element.
You're right. One of the most unsettling things about hybrid warfare is that it targets people's minds, not just physical infrastructure. It's about sowing those seeds of doubt, creating fear, uncertainty, eroding trust in institutions.
So it's not just about cutting those cables. It's about cutting connections between people, undermining the very fabric of society.
Exactly. And that makes this kind of conflict so much harder to fight. Because you need more than just technological solutions. You need social and political solutions, too.
So how do we do that? How do we build that kind of resilience in a world that often feels so divided, so vulnerable to misinformation?
Well, it starts with awareness. We need to understand the tactics that are being used, the stories that are being spread, the vulnerabilities that are being exploited. We need to be able to think critically, to separate fact from fiction, to question the information that's constantly bombarding us, and to resist those who are trying to manipulate us.
It's about being informed citizens, right? Being engaged in the issues that matter, being willing to challenge those who are spreading lies or trying to create division.
Absolutely. It's about media literacy, critical thinking, healthy skepticism. And it's about building a sense of community, a sense of shared purpose, trust in reliable sources of information, recognizing that we're all in this together, that our interconnectedness, it's both a strength and a vulnerability.
It's interesting because it seems like those same qualities that make the internet so powerful, its openness, its accessibility, those are the same things that make it vulnerable to manipulation and abuse.
Right.
So how do we find that balance? How do we use the internet for good while also protecting ourselves from its potential for harm?
That's the big question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer. It's going to take a lot of ongoing dialogue, collaboration, innovation. We need governments, tech companies, individuals, all working together to create a digital world that's more secure, more resilient, more trustworthy.
It feels like we're at this crossroads, a real turning point for the internet. We can either give in to the forces of division and distrust, or we can step up and build a digital future. That actually benefits all of humanity.
I agree. And it's a choice we're making every single day. With every click, every share, every interaction we have online, we have the power to shape the internet, to make it a force for connection, for understanding, for progress.
Well said. So let's take a minute to think back on what we've learned in this deep dive. We started with those seemingly isolated incidents of cable damage in the Baltic Sea, but as we dug deeper, we uncovered a much larger story. A story about geopolitical tensions, about hybrid warfare, about the vulnerability of our digital infrastructure, and the incredible challenges and opportunities of our interconnected world.
We've seen how something that happens in one part of the world can have ripple effects across the globe, how even seemingly small events can have huge consequences, and how the internet, with all its amazing benefits, can also be a tool for disruption and manipulation.
We've also seen some signs of hope, though. Signs of potential for innovation, for collaboration, for resilience. We've seen how scientists are using those undersea cables for research and exploration, how entrepreneurs are imagining a more sustainable and resilient digital future, and how everyday people like us, by being informed and engaged, can help shape that future.
It's a good reminder that the future isn't set in stone. It's a choice, and it's a choice we're all making together.
So as you go about your day, as you connect with your friends and family online, as you work, learn, and explore in this digital world, remember those undersea cables, those invisible threads that connect us all. Think about how vulnerable they are.
Yeah.
Think about their incredible potential, and think about the profound impact they have on our lives.
And remember, the future of the internet isn't just about technology. It's about humanity. It's about how we connect with each other, how we share information, how we build communities, and how we create the world we want to live in.
Well said. Until next time, keep exploring,
Yeah.
keep connecting, and keep diving deep.